lovely Kate Sullivan. She's an expert, the biggest expert I know on Celtic lore and Celtic legend. And she's also one of my favorite authors. So I'm really excited that we can speak today and that we can discuss her new book, Nimue, if I say it right, Nimue. And it's mainly about this fascinating character and Merlin and the beautiful, you know, legends of the Arthurian tradition, Arthurian legends. So there's so many questions, Aine, I would like to ask you today, but let's start with the exciting characters and your amazing knowledge of them. So could you introduce Merlin and Nimue?
Ah, my favorite subjects. Thank you for having me on this show. And I love your books too, so this works out quite well. So I have always loved the Lady of the Lake, right?
Yeah, that's another name for Nimue. That's, I think most people probably know her as the Lady of the Lake. So,
absolutely,
yeah.
Absolutely. In fact, it all started with a dream that I had years ago. And I don't know if well, I will share this story because this is how it started. So I had a dream years ago that I was the Lady of the Lake. And I was living in California at the time, but I had been to Cornwall. I'd been all over Britain. I knew about the Lady of the Lake, but in this dream, I was this archetype, right? And so the next day I got up and I went to tell this friend of mine who always kind of thought of himself as a kind of King Arthur type character. His name was Norm Paulson, and he ran Solar Logos. It's called Sunburst now, but back then it was Solar Logos. And he goes, I have a sword that was given to me by spirit. He brought out Excalibur. So I borrowed Excalibur, and which had appeared to him, it had appeared, and it was a sword that he told me had manifested. And he kept it as a sign of his sort of spiritual path. So I had this friend who was actually a British guy named Martin, and we went out to Zaka Lake, which is in California, and it's one of these places that's very deep. Nobody knows how deep this lake is. It might even be a portal to the other world, right? So we get in the lake, and now I'm trying to figure out, really, in doing this photo shoot, is the Lady of the Lake a real person? Was she a real person? Is she a deity? Is she an archetype? What is she? So now I'm in a white dress and I'm painted up and I have a sword. And Martin's saying, step back a little bit so I can just get the sword in the light. Step back, step back. Well, I disappeared. I dropped into the lake with the sword, right? It literally, I had the dream, but then in the reality of falling through the lake without a bottom was a little bit interesting. And I was not going to let go of the sword. I mean, like I had promised Norm Paulson that I would come back with the sword. I couldn't let it go. And I had a dress on, so I couldn't really get out. And I was sort of sinking, trying to figure out what to do. And something threw me out of the lake, right? So we have this great picture of me emerging from this, I don't even know if it was a wave or it was maybe the dragon of the lake. I don't know what it was, but I have a fabulous picture of it. And afterwards, I really was thinking that when we go and find these archetypes, when we go on the fool's quest in the tarot, right? We're the fool, we're the seeker, we go looking for them, that they actually appear to us, their powers. And I realized what had happened in engaging that archetype is she had shown me something of her power. So she's a deity and she is available to everybody.
And I would love it if you would tell us more about how you view Merlin also, because he's such an important part.
Well, in my sort of doctoral studies, I went through, in fact, if you get the book and then you look at the back, if you go back to the back, to the glossary, I have a whole list of how I came about it in sort of more linear fashion. But Merlin, most people know, and he is, a lot of people will take him back to Taliesin, who was a fellow who lived, a bard who lived in the 5th century. but they're mini Merlins, and it's like the Lady of the Lake. There are 9 ladies of the lake that I know of. Nimue is one of them. But it's like you have a diamond, you have a faceted diamond, a multifaceted diamond, and then this is how they express themselves. So Merlin is the archetype of the magician, of the wise man who keeps wisdom alive through the ages, and his role in a lot of Arthurian legend is to be the druid or the wise person who whispers wisdom to the king. So the king, Arthur in this case, could really keep peace in the land. Arthur really holds the archetype of the emperor. And then the emperor archetype has sort of been under attack, but the true emperor as an archetype is the man who protects his people, who holds justice, who helps us understand how culture works, how it operates. So Arthur, he's sort of a Christ figure also, Arthur. He's the noble one who brings light to humanity. So each of these deities, if you think about it, you can see in the tarot. If you start to engage the archetypes in the tarot, they're also there. And you can find them all the way. When I go through, I'll go back to the 12th century and I'll go back to 5th century. And most of my sources are reference from either 12th or 5th century literature. And and they're still estefads. They're still Welsh estefads, the time when the bards come and they tell the old tales. And the reason that so many centuries later we will be telling these stories again is because their wisdom needs to live in each age, and the wisdom will live in each age differently depending on our needs. So, we could also say, well, why are they important now? Why are these deities? So the Lady of the Lake is the priestess, the magic, right?
Yeah.
The missing one, the Grail. Where did she go? We need our high magic. So Lady of the Lake is the high magic. And Merlin, so she tends to be more hidden, receptive. You have to go seeking her. And Merlin might, if you are holding your throne, might appear and whisper in your ears.
I love that.
Merlin, one thing I really love about the Celtic tradition, when we're speaking of Merlin, is that in the Celtic tradition, they often, before they become a wise druid or a wise being, they often have 7 years of madness in the forest. And I mean, part of this could be there's still the order of bards, ovates, and druids. And bards have been telling these stories since 5th century, right? So the reason that you have this period of madness in the forest, and that's Mervyn Emrys, his original name, is that you're starting to disconnect from the ego program, the persona, the way that we're meant to operate in the world. And Merlin has a variety of different origins, but one is that he's an orphan, so he doesn't fully know who he is. And so in this discovery of the self, he has to drop his story, and he has to start to understand his true nature, which in the Celtic tradition you discover in the woods, on your quest in the forest. And the madness is the unraveling. And then at a certain point, once you're unraveled, once you're empty of visions of the self, the understanding of the self, then you begin to perceive the reality of life and your place in it. And that's Merlin. I mean, that's why we also fear Merlin in a different way than Morgan. We fear our madness. He doesn't fear his madness. And then if we're going through periods in our life where we feel unraveled because of events, he's a very good guide and archetype to work with.
Yeah, and I love this forest and tree symbolism with Merlin. I've always wanted to ask you about this.
Yes.
This legend that he disappeared in the tree. In the end, I view it as like stepping into the other realm, like through the tree of life, right?
Yes.
What is your take on it? How do you view it?
Well, it's interesting too. When I was writing the book, it was he disappeared in a variety of different ways, and I finally just had to meditate and decide on one. But basically, I think you're right. In the Celtic world, you have it's a circular, it looks like a torus field, actually.
Yes.
Or the Vesica Pisces.
Well, that's what I discuss in 2 of my books. This, you know, it fascinates me that the Celtic tree of life is actually the torus, like in shape, and it resembles our electromagnetic field, and it all combines with like various symbols. But yeah, sorry to disturb you.
No, that's actually brilliant. It's absolutely, what you're saying there is brilliant. And this is actually exciting, because we're at a time on our planet right now where the old sacred sites are really turning back on again. And what happens when you go to these sacred sites, especially during the equinoxes and the solstices, is that your torus field can activate. So in a way, Merlin is a guide into the tree of life. He is that guide into the tree of life, to the activation of your own torus field. And if you look at the torus field activated, if you draw it, if you take a picture of it in your mind, well, I mean, I guess I don't know if you can take an energetic picture of it, but you could definitely draw it.
In your mind, I guess.
Right? You get the idea. The torus field, in the middle is a chalice, right? It's a grail. It's a holy grail. So he's leading you to the holy grail. What is the holy grail? It's actually your own wholeness. It's your own connection to all that exists. But if you're full, you can't find it. You have to empty. You have to empty yourself to be, and go on your quest, empty out, be humble, be grateful, be open, and then you find the grail, right?
Yeah, and that's another thing, like I wanted to discuss the grails, because I know from you again that there are many kinds of grails. We usually, like, the most common one is the Holy Grail, but there's also the Fairy Grail and some other grails. So could you tell us about that?
Yeah, it's really fun. So I started this whole journey in Glastonbury, and in Glastonbury, there's a story of Joseph of Arimathea, who was a merchant during the time Christ was crucified, who took the cup. Some say he had his blood, the blood from his crucifixion in it. Some say it was the last cup he sipped from. And then other people say, well, it wasn't actually a cup at all. It was Mary Magdalene herself, or Mary Magdalene's daughter, Sarah. So, who was the daughter of Christ. So there are different versions of this, and of course, depending on which version you tell, you're more and more of a heretic, right? Depending on, especially back then, right? So you had to be a little careful. And they taught at that time that Jesus and Mary Magdalene were twin flames, and that he was meant to hold the light, and she was meant to hold the church. So one of the very first, I think it was the first church, or one of the very first churches built in the British Isles was in Glastonbury, and there up at the top of the hill you have the holy. Somebody cut it down, believe it or not, but there was the holy thorn, which would blossom in the winter. And
it's not there anymore?
No, someone cut it down. Can you believe it? I don't know who did that. They don't have good karma, whoever did that. But it was the original staff. They say, the myth, the story is it's the staff of Joseph of Arimathea.
Yeah.
They took part of the staff's at the Glastonbury Abbey, and part of the staff's now in the Chalice Well. They're both protected, so they're pieces of it still. But the park where it was is open, and they couldn't protect it. We should all protect sacred sites. It's also on a path that's known as the Dragon's Back, and so you have this real mix of legend there of the early Christians coming, bringing the light of that world of the Middle East in, and then you have this really ancient Druid. It was an ancient Druid site too, and so you have this mix. And I think that the Druids really understood. Now you have to understand how long Druids were trained. I mean, they were first bards. They had to know 250 stories of their people at least, and to be able to recite them. Why? Because each tale had wisdom in it that you wanted to pass, the wisdom of the ages. And then you would become an ovate, which is more the priestess tradition, an oracle, where you would learn to receive the wisdom of the divine, or the wisdom. It could be anything. You might be listening to it was very polytheistic. You were listening to the elements. You might be listening to the voice of the lake. You don't know. So there was that component. But anyway, there are multiple layers, aren't there, to this?
Yeah, it's. And also, I wanted to ask you about the
Fairy Grail.
Fairy Grail, yes.
Right. I told you about the Holy Grail, which was kept. Okay, so the rest of the story is it was kept at the well, at the Glastonbury, the Glastonbury well, Chalice Well, it's called. And you can go and stay there, and Tudor Pole protected it. He had a vision to protect it. It's very beautiful. But the part that took longer to understand, and it was really came through the work of Catelyn Matthews, who's very brilliant, is that there's an older Grail that was really much more from those lands. The Christian stories are actually from a different land, and then there's the stories that originate in that land. Mm-hmm. And those are more connected to the Fairy Grail. So these are pre-Christian stories, and the priestesses of Avalon are an overlap between those worlds. Mm-hmm. But they were protecting. So in that world, there was a deity that protected each well and spring, because wells and springs were considered portals to the goddess.
Yeah,
they were considered sacred. The land was considered sacred. Then there was, unfortunately, there was a man named, his name is Aman Gons, but Aman Gon, like he was not there, right? They go and they rape them, so they disappeared from the land. That's part of the story of searching for the. In fact, I thought that was completely what it was about originally. That we were looking for the lost goddess. But so there are many grails and cauldrons of rebirth and magical cups. But what all of them do is they lead you to the goddess. They lead you to the sacred feminine. Mm-hmm. It's interesting when you take stories back to their origin. Like if you take that, 12th century was all about the troubadours, and Eleanor of Aquitaine had ridden off, and she'd gone to the Holy Land, and she'd come back, and she wanted to tell all the Grail stories. She wanted them available in the courts, and she sort of fancied herself as Guinevere, and she had made it back actually because she had found this Turkish king, so she was quite a character. But so, and maybe the Turkish king's Lancelot, potentially, because he appears in the stories about that time. But if you take the stories back to their earlier form, Guinevere wasn't someone who cheated on her husband. Guinevere was actually the May Queen. And so she was the power. She was the sovereignty of the land. And there are actually 4 Guineveres. And as we get, later and they become more Christianized, you lose that original flower bride, the power. And in the old story, the early stories, you cannot be king unless the May Queen chooses you, the sovereignty, the goddess of sovereignty chooses you and says, you actually have what it takes to be the ruler of the land. Because if you are the ruler of the land, it means everything must thrive. Right? So he has to be the protector of the land. And if you have a maimed king, if you have a king that's divided against himself, where he doesn't understand how to use his power correctly, then the land goes into despair. Yeah,
it's all about this harmony, right? Of these feminine, masculine, and it's like with the green man. I think not many people know that there's also a green woman because she's been shunned from mythology. But yeah, so
okay, so speaking of the green woman, if you look through the portal here, you might see her off in the distance. But so in the Celtic world, one of the green ladies, there are many green ladies, one of the green ladies is Ellen of the Ways. Do you know her?
Yes,
antlers.
Yes.
She's the feminine Cernunnos, who appears as the Lord of the Beasts. He's sort of the Shiva in the Eastern tradition. He'd be Shiva. And Ellen of the Ways is sort of the Venus, or the Venus, or the Shakti, or the, who would she be in the Hindu tradition? She would be maybe not Lakshmi really as much as maybe she's Shakti. She's just like the feminine juice, you know, she really is that. And she guides you on the way. She survives as Saint Helen. She appears later as Saint Helen, but she is the one, if you're ready for the heroine's path, which is about the path of receptivity, developing your clairvoyance, your clairaudience, your clairsentience, all these things that, you know, once upon a time we're not meant to do. Now we have to develop them because it's time for direct knowing.
And I also love how the tarot symbolism relates to the hero's journey, or in your case, it's the heroine's journey. And, you know, all these like steps along the way. So could you maybe tell us about your experience with the heroine's journey? Because I know Nimue is a heroine's journey, right? So
it is. It's taken me on an absolute quest in many different ways. One was just going to the Chalice Well and spending time in Glastonbury, where those deities are very active, and then going to Cornwall and learning about them. I go into libraries, I read about them, and then I go to the place like St. Nectan's Glen, where they're said to reside, and I meditate there, and I tune in to the deities there. When I came back from my quest, from discovering more about them and my different ways that I do research, but again, I do research in a way that's both very academic, and then I go and quest in a spiritual way too. So it's more of a pilgrimage. So I actually, when I came back, I wrote it out, the novel, the draft form, as a tarot set, kind of like Liz Green had done with her tarot set. And because I wanted to follow the path of Nimue and how she awakened to her own complexity and her wholeness. And then I took it out, but they're actually mystery codes all the way through the book. If you know a little bit about Celtic mythology, and I didn't want to make it obvious because, you know, the high priestess will invite you into the mysteries when you're ready, right? That's even true if you go to some of the Templar churches. You only get in if you can read the signs outside the building, if you know what they are, because that means that you're ready. You know, you're ready to be initiated into the path. So the book is a little bit like this. If you look closely, you'll find where the Grail is leading you.
Yeah, I love that. I love that about the book. You know, it's not just a book; it's magic. I mean, it really takes you on a journey. And I love in your book how you work with the magic staffs and the serpent symbolism.
Yes.
And the dragon symbolism, and how it all like ties in together. Could you tell us about that?
I'd love to. If you think for a minute about India, and if you think of Shiva would have a cobra over his head. Or if you think of Kuan Yin in Asia, she would be riding a dragon because it represents life. And it also might, in some instances, it's also overcoming your animal nature, and it sort of went more and more with that direction. So then we were shown with George stabbing the dragon, you know, subduing the dragon. But really, the dragon is power. And so each of us, as we discover our inner dragon, we could just do a whole workshop about this, discovering your inner dragon, right? You discover the power of your being. And I think people are quite frightened of power. You know, they think of those who have abused others or have overpowered others, or they've maybe been overpowered. Power is not that at all. Power is life itself operating. And so serpents and dragons are symbols of universal life in full operation. And they're delicate. I mean, if you step on a snake, you can hurt it, so they bite. You know, some of them are venomous. Not so much in the Celtic world. In there's only the adder in the British Isles. but the dragon is a very potent symbol for our time right now, because now that we're in the Aquarian age, we're here in the Aquarian age now. And it means that all of these sacred sites, the sites that the indigenous people have worked with, are back online. So when we go back to these places, they call them quite often dragon lines. And when you go to these places where the dragon line's on, it's like your own caduceus, your magical staff within you, within your own spine, can wake up, and you can come back online. And that's true power, is when you are the cosmos operating, right? That's what it is, and that's what the dragon symbolizes.
Yeah, I love that. And also, I've been meaning to ask you about the Celtic approach to reincarnation.
Well,
the Celtic lore.
Yeah, I mean, they had to stop these Celts, because the problem, the reason they had to go kill all the Druids is because the Druids taught reincarnation. That was one of the reasons. But so they weren't afraid to die in battle, because they would charge out and then, well, see you in Guinevere, or wherever, right? So they weren't frightened of dying. And so they were ferocious warriors. And one of the things that I love about the Celtic world is that there was equality between the men and women. So there were female druids and male druids. There were female warriors and male warriors. And in fact, when a man wanted to become a hero, he was sent to go train with a magical warrior woman. So yeah, that was they just knew. I mean, depending on which era you're in, or you might drop into a whole variety of other worlds. And I think this is something important for us to explore, because once we understand, this is in the book too. We call it the screening room in the book, where you go and you look at your multiple lives that are all running simultaneously, because time is actually spiral. It's not linear. We just have to have it in a linear way so we can understand it. But really, once we begin to realize that if we keep taking it out, we are everyone and everything. Mm-hmm. And we live forever. And the problem with this, of course, is that once you really get that, you don't have any fear of death, because there's no such thing. You will drop your body, but you never die. And so, these wild heretics of the forest, right? They come out with their staff and live fully. But of course, there's a kindness too. It's like there's an interest in. I mean, the reason we would incarnate over and over again is because we're interested in life and life unfolding. Their culture of life. We've been living in the culture of death, but that's ending now. We're moving into the culture of life.